There are two main reasons to create a mass in Revit. One is to create a family or a component, and the other is for conceptual design of a project. This is when you're looking for the initial broad strokes of a design and you want to see the size, shape, and relationship of a building within the context of its site. And so the two types are a family editor and a conceptual design environment. Both of these are outside families, files. You can create a new file and create a family, or create a different type of file and create a conceptual design. You can do either of these types of masses within the project environment as an in-place mass. So you can do an in-place mass as a component, or an in-place mass as a mass or a conceptual design. They're broken into two different ways because you create each one differently, and we'll take a look at both. To create a new file for a family, you would go to your File tab, New, and create a new family, and you would load a template. To create a new file for a conceptual design, you would go to File as well, also New, but you would create a new conceptual mass file. We're not going to do either of those today. What we will do is look at how to create a component or a conceptual design, both within the project environment, within this file. We'll do that because it's easier to take a look at while we're working in Revit, though keep in mind it's the exact same process. To create a component within the project environment, you will go to your Architecture tab, Build Panel, and you would go down on your drop-down menu of Component and Model in Place. And so you're telling Revit that you will create a new component within the project environment. Likewise, if you're going to create a conceptual mass within the project environment as a mass, you would go to the Massing and Site tab here and create an in-place mass with this tool. So to begin, let's take a look at how to create components or families within the project environment. To do that, again, we'll go to the Architecture tab, Build Panel, Component drop-down menu, and we will Model in Place. This is for any component that is specific to this one project, as you'll be building the model of this component within this project. When you select Model in Place, Revit wants you to pick which family category this will be. For instance, if we're going to create a desk, we might pick Casework. Then Revit wants you to name it, and we can name this Entry Desk. So this will be, well, doesn't matter. Now we are in sketch mode. As you can see, everything is grayed out, and you have the green check and red X. We are now in the In-Place editor. You can also see on the Create tab, you have several tools to create your component or your mass. The extrusion, the blend, the revolve, the sweep, and the swept blend. You can also create void forms of the same tools. So your components or masses are created by combining these tools along with the void forms of these tools together, all within one family. Then when you're done creating different masses and different voids, you can finish the model and you will have your component. Let's take a look at the structure of creating these components. As you enter sketch mode, you can see that we'll be in the sketch mode of creating the mass. And when you enter, you'll be in the main family or the model sketch mode, and you will start this sketch mode. The very next step is to start another mass, or I should say start a mass within the main family. Once you're done creating the mass, then you'll have to finish this sketch mode here to finish mass 1 of the model. And then when you're done with that, if that's the only mass you have in the model, then you'll need to finish the actual model. The point of this is to create a component in the environment of Revit. You'll have to finish 2 sketch modes as a minimum, one for the mass within the main component and one for the entire thing. Let's look at it if we have more than one mass to create the component. Again, you'll start with the main family model, and that will begin your first sketch mode. Then you'll start a mass number 1, and you'll finish mass number 1. And so that'll be your first sketch mode to finish. Then if you add a multi-step mass within the model, you will start it here. And you might have a sketch mode within that mass, and so you'll have to finish that sketch mode for the multi-step mass. Then you'll have to finish the mass number 2 sketch mode. And then perhaps you have a third mass to combine with the other 2 to create the main model. And you'll start and finish that third mass. And then finally, you'll finish the main family model. And so just in this example, you will start at least 1, 2, 3, 4 sketch modes, and you'll have to finish 4 sketch modes. This will make more sense as we go through the exercises. Now let's take a look at the 5 different ways to create massing in the component Model in Place tool: extrusion, blend, revolve, sweep, and swept blend. We'll start with extrusion. Extrusion will be taking a profile and extruding it along a single straight path. So it's one profile along a straight path. So for instance, if we have a rectangle or a square, and we draw that profile in Revit, and we extrude it, say, straight up, well, Revit will create a solid mass as it extrudes this profile up. So it'll create this shape. So if you took a square and you extruded it straight along a path in the vertical dimension, Revit will create a cube. To create an extrusion in Revit, we'll click on the extrusion tool, and we'll need to draw, we're in the first floor plan, draw a profile. In this case, just like we saw in the sketch, we'll draw a square. And over here in the properties, we can tell Revit how tall to make the cube as it extrudes this square along the straight path, in this case 1 foot. We'll finish the sketch mode of that mass, and remember, now we'll have to finish the actual model of this family. And I get rid of this text. And you can see that it's still a square, but if we look at it in 3D and shade it, you can see that this is in fact a cube. You can highlight it and stretch and pull the mass in Revit. To create a blend mass, Revit will take 2 profiles along a straight path, and as it combines the 2 profiles, it will create a solid object along that straight path. Again, we'll start with a square or a rectangle laying flat. But this time, instead of extruding that profile up to the same profile up higher, Revit will take a different profile. You'll create a different profile for Revit. And let's say this time we draw a triangle up here. Well, Revit will create a solid mass that combines these 2. And this is blend, 2 profiles along a straight path. And Revit will create that mass. To create the blend, we'll go to the blend tool here, and we'll start the sketch mode of the blend. Remember, we need to draw two different profiles, two different shapes. We'll start with the square at the bottom, and we'll go ahead and draw a square. And we can see that that's on level 1. Now remember, over in the Properties palette, this tells us how tall we'll make the new mass. In this case, let's go ahead and make it, let me make it 50 feet tall, because this is a big square. And the only way we knew that we were drawing on the base is because up here on these tools, you can see an Edit Top toggle. Because this is a tool to select for us to edit the top or create the top, we know that we are currently working on the base. Once we're done with the base, we can say edit the top, and now we're going to draw the profile at the top of this mass. And we can go ahead and draw that triangle that we drew in the sketch. We'll finish that model, that mass. And you can see that we have a square at the bottom. If I go into wireframe, you can see the square at the bottom, the triangle at the top, and that's the mass. To create a sweep, we will start with a single profile, and instead of extruding it along a straight path, we will actually draw the path that we'll want Revit to sweep the profile along. So this is when you want to create a mass that is not extruded along a straight path. So for instance, if we have a triangle, and instead of laying it flat down, we actually stand it up. And then I'll draw the path from the top point, vertex here, and say we want to draw or sweep a path in that shape. Well, Revit will take this profile, and as it sweeps it along that path, it will make a solid object from that. And so this object would look something like this. And there would be an edge down along this side. And that is sweep. In Revit, we'll go ahead and select the sweep tool. And Revit will want us to start with creating the path, and we can either pick a path. So if we have modeled something in our file here, a wall of some sort or anything really, we can pick a path, or we can sketch a path, and we'll go ahead and sketch a path. Now, one trick to keep in mind is, even though sweep is really to create something along a path that's not straight, non-linear, because otherwise, if that was the case, we'd use extrusion. But because the path is normally for a sweep not straight, however, to make things easy, I'm going to go ahead and start with a straight path. And we're in sketch mode for the path, and you can see several things here. The magenta line is the actual path. The red dot is the intersection of the path and the green reference plane. As you can see over here in the 3D view, the reference plane is perpendicular to the path, and that's where we will draw our profile, on that green reference plane. The reason I started with a straight path is so that the green reference plane will be exactly perpendicular to a view that we're going to select, so we can draw along this reference plane. In this case, we'll select the west elevation, and so we'll look from here towards the reference plane, and we'll be able to draw on it. So we can finish. So we need to finish the sketch mode of the path. And again, this is our multi-step mass. So this is where we're going to finish several times to get through this mass. So we'll finish the path. And now you can see that Revit is prompting us to sketch a profile. We could load a profile if we want, but we'll go ahead and sketch a profile by using the Edit Profile. And it is now prompting us to pick an elevation. again, we'll start with the, or we'll go to the west elevation. We'll open that view. And here it is. And so now we can draw. You can see the red dot gives us a reference of where this center or this intersection is. And you can see the two lines for the reference plane. So we'll go ahead and draw that triangle that we did in the sketch. And you can see it show up on the 3D view as well. I'm going to close that elevation now. And you can see that we have the triangle in 3D view here. We can go ahead and finish the profile. And now we're going to have to finish again, and this will finish the sweep. And notice that we still even have not finished the actual model. That's in case we want to add a void or another mask to this. But you can see how Revit created a sweep of that triangle along a straight path. Keep in mind this is no different than an extrusion. So let's make this different than an extrusion. And the way we're going to do that is, now that we've drawn the triangle from an elevation that was exactly perpendicular to the reference plane, we can go back, or we can select this, and we can edit that sweep. And we'll go ahead and select this and sketch the path. Now Revit's going to keep in mind the triangle or the profile that we've created. And so we can take this path and we can delete it. And we can draw whatever we want now for a new path. Something like that. And Revit will keep in mind again that triangle or that profile. We'll finish the path, and then we'll finish the sweep. We don't need to go back to editing the profile. All we have to do is finish the sweep. And you can see that Revit took that triangle and swept it along the curved path. For swept blend, Revit will take two profiles this time, not one, and combine them along a non-straight path. So this is a combination of the sweep command and the blend command. So it blends two profiles along a curved or non-linear path. So again, let's start with a triangle standing on edge. And we can draw a curved path. And maybe we'll finish with a square. And so as Revit extrudes the triangle along this path, it will blend it into a square at the other end. In fact, let's get rid of this path here. The path will be the same shape, but instead of going to the middle of the square, it'll go to each edge. So we'll do something like that, and something like that. And then the corners will, oops, the corners will align like that. And this one will be in the back. For the swept blend tool in Revit, we'll pick the swept blend tool up here. And this will, again, combine two different profiles along a sketched path. So just like we did with the sweep tool, we're going to sketch a path. And again, we'll just create a straight path to make things easy. And then we'll change that path after we've drawn the profiles. You can see in this instance, we have two reference planes. In the sweep tool, we had one reference plane in the middle, and this one we have two, one at each end of the path. So we were in sketch mode for the path, so we'll finish the sketch mode for the path. And now we can select profile 1, select profile 2. So we'll go ahead and select profile 1, and when we pick the edit profile, that means basically we're going to sketch a profile. It's going to want us to pick an elevation to draw profile 1, so we'll go to the west elevation. And just like in the sweep tool, it gives us a reference with that red dot there. So like the sketch, we'll start with a triangle. And you can see it over in the 3D view. It's also down here. You can see that we drew it in plan view as well. So we'll finish the sketch mode for profile 1, and now we'll select profile 2, and we'll edit the profile or sketch that profile. We can stay in the west elevation, but now we're going to draw a profile at this end. And we'll go ahead and draw the square that we did in the sketch. And you can see it over here in this view. We'll finish that profile sketch. And now we'll finish the swept blend tool. And again, notice that if we were going to finish this model or this component, we would need to finish one last time. But we can take a look over in the 3D view that it swept a triangle from one end to a square at the other end. And now let's go ahead and change that path to something curved or nonlinear. So we'll edit the swept blend tool. We need to select the path again and sketch the path. Now we can delete it, and we can just create any kind of curved path. Let's make it simple this time and just put a curve on it. Finish the path, finish the swept blend tool, and you can see that we now have a curve going from a triangle to a square. To create a mass using the revolve tool, you'll basically take an axis, and then you'll create a profile to revolve around that axis. In this case, if we, if we did something like that, it would create a cone shape with a groove cut out of it. So as this revolved around here, Revit would make a solid form out of that. And it would, I don't know if it will draw this, but it would have a couple grooves in there, and then it would come to a point at the bottom. These grooves would actually look, it would have a something like that, but it would look like a hole at the top because of this, and so that's revolve. So to create the revolve, we'll go up to the revolve tool, and we will draw an axis line and a boundary line to create the revolve mass. Note that the axis line and the boundary line will be drawn on the work plane. So right now the work plane is floor plan level 1 or level 1, so it's flat. So we'll draw something basically laying on its side. And you'll see what I mean in just a moment. But let's start with the axis line, and we'll draw a straight axis line here. And then let's go ahead and draw a boundary line in the shape that we drew in the sketch. We'll start at the axis line, we'll go down and up, and then we'll draw a curved line back to the axis line. And then we'll need to finish it off. It needs to be a closed loop. And so that's our profile. And when we finish this, Revit will revolve it around the axis, and we'll get a three-dimensional shape. And you can see it's similar to our sketch. And that's revolve. Let's look at how we could set something up on end as we create the revolve tool. To do that, we'll need to change the work plane. So in this quick exercise, let's create a table and then a cup that sits on the table, all within one family. So you'll see a multi-mass family in this component. So we'll go to our Create tab. Well, if we were going to start all over, we will go to our Architecture tab, Component, component model in place. Case works fine. Case work 1. So let's start with an extrusion. And we can do a quick extrusion. Sorry about that. And we have a big flat table. So now let's add to this mass. You can see that we're still within the model or the component family because we haven't finished the model. But we have one mass, so let's add another mass, and this one will be a revolve. Now, if we were going to draw our axis line, it would be flat on top of this extrusion. But we want to make it a cup or a glass, so we don't want it laying down. If we drew the axis here, it would revolve flat. So we need to set the work plane over here. And when we hit set, our options for names are only floor plan 1 or floor plan 2, so that doesn't help us to set this glass up straight. So we'll pick a plane, hit OK, and now Revit wants us to pick a plane, and you can see as I hover it'll highlight different ones, and we'll go ahead and select that one. And since we selected a vertical plane, we now need to pick an elevation to draw our revolve mass. So we can pick the north one, that's fine. So now we're going to draw the axis line first. And now we can draw the boundary line. And let's go ahead and, it's going to be a very tall glass, very big glass, but that's fine. It's more for the idea. Something like that, and it'll revolve around that. And then we can finish the entire model, and you can see that this works as one component because we drew that glass on that work plane to the edge. It's going to stay on that edge, but if we were to create that cup by itself as its own file or its own component, then we could move it around. But it is actually part of that one big component. So we just finished looking at creating a mass as a component within the project environment. Now let's take a look at creating a mass as a mass within the project environment. This is the same thing as if we were to create a new file for conceptual design. So it's a different way of creating masses, and it's for big scale masses like an entire building, an entire project, as opposed to the family or the component massing that we just took a look at. To create the conceptual design mass, we're actually going to go to the Mass and Insight tab. And here we will create an in-place mass. Before we go there, I want to take you through the drop-down menu of the Show Mass and Form Floors. By default, Revit usually comes with this as set as Show Mass by View Settings. This means if we went to Visibility Graphics Override, we could scroll down and see that the mass is turned off, which means if we were to create a mass right now, we would not be able to see it. But as we select the In-Place Mass tool, Revit will say that it has enabled the Show Mass mode. And that is this selection on the drop-down, the Show Mass from Form and Floors. So now we will be able to see the mass. However, if we were to print this view, we would not see the mass at all. And again, that's because this is still turned off. Here. So if you want to print the mass that you create, make sure you go to VG, Visibility Graphics Override, and turn your mass selection on there. And then by default, Revit will turn this on for you when you try to create an in-place mass. So let's begin. We're on the Mass and Siding tab, Conceptual Mass, and we'll do an in-place mass. The name is fine. Now, unlike when we created components, we don't have the 5 tools to work from. All we need to do is select shapes, and we can draw these shapes on a face of something or on the work plane. Since we don't have any objects here, we'll go ahead and draw things on the work plane. And we can start with a square. We'll go ahead and look at the 3D view as well. Now we have a square, and we've drawn on floor plan level 1. We can select that square, and from here, all we have to do is create a form, a solid form. And you can see in 3D view that it created a cube. Not only that, we can now select, and by using our tab key, select different portions of this mass, either an edge or the whole thing, or one face, or a different face. And once we select that, we can push and pull this in different ways to modify our mass. We can even rotate this if we want. And we can stretch and pull these masses any way we want. If we finish that mass, it's now one object. We can select it, edit in place, and then if we select it again from our edit, we get a different set of tools. If we look at it in X-ray view, you can see the vertices that we can push and pull to continually modifying the shape of this. We can even add a profile, and when we do this, we get more vertices to play with. So now we can grab any individual one of these and start pushing and pulling to get the shape, the desired effect that we want. And we're done. When we are done, we can just finish that mass, and we get the shape that we were looking for. I'll show you just one last thing with the conceptual design mass, and that is if we wanted to create a shape out of more than just one shape. So we'll go ahead and do the in-place mass again, and we'll go ahead and draw our square that we had before. But this time we'll go to level 2, and we'll draw a different shape. Still on the work plane, and maybe this time we'll draw a circle. And we'll center it. We can go to 3D view now, and we can see that we have our 2 shapes. Well, if we wanted to create a mass out of these 2 shapes, we would just select both of them and then create our form, solid form. And you can see that it created a mass. Finish the mass, we can highlight the mass, edit the mass again. Select the entire mass, and we can do X-ray, and we can add another profile and play with it just like we did the last one. And the strength of creating masses with this conceptual design tool is that we can now apply floors and ceilings and roofs to this mass and create a building out of it, which we'll look at in the next video.